in the last 20 years, with state actions, we cut $825 million worth of taxes. On top of that, two other things happened. The inheritance tax, which the state piggybacked on the federal tax policy, the inheritance tax used to generate about $160 million a year. The federal government phased it out over 4 years in the early 2000s, and when they phased it out, ours got phased out exactly the same way. So we lost $160 million. So you just take those things, 825 plus 160 million, you're at nearly $1 billion of tax cuts, essentially in about the last 15 years. The other thing that happened in, I believe it was 2004, is the voters approved the half of motor vehicle sales tax that went to MoDOT. The other half went to general revenue. The voters approved giving it all to MoDOT, and that cost general fund about $187 million. So in the aggregate, about $1.2 billion taken out of what otherwise would have gone to the general fund. And the paradox of what we do in Missouri is when we go down like this, all those tax cuts were accomplished without a vote of the people. To reimpose any of them because of Carnahan Farm Bureau that was passed in 1996 requires a vote of the people. So as we're talking now, and one of the cautions I give to legislators is, one, we've already done a lot of tax cuts. Don't think we haven't. And two, be careful what you do, because anything you cut can be done without a vote of the people. Probably anything that they would cut would have to be reimposed only with a vote of the people. So this is just net general revenue growth in the last 20 years. When you throw all those things in the mix, this is what happened. And we started out at about $5 billion, and we are still below $8 billion 20 years later. And part of the reason for showing you this is if tax cuts create economic growth, why aren't those lines bigger? Actually, during that period, the average growth for 20 years was $184 million on, again, we started at 5, went up to 8, we bounced around. Let's just pick a number and say $7 billion. So $184 million on a base of $7 billion is not a whole lot. And remember, in 5 of those years, we actually gave a lot of that money back because we did Hancock refunds. And again, this just shows you individual income tax receipts. And again, you can see the impact of capital gains here. When you see the drops, a lot of that's capital gains. And on average, in the 20 years, individual income tax out of that 184 was about 160. This is a great chart. I love this because when I was talking on the so-called fair tax, the first time I ever talked about it in front of the Senate committee was in 2009, and I followed Dr. Arthur Laffer, who's the Reagan-era economist who is a big supporter of the fair tax. And he said to the committee, the reason you want a sales tax is because it's so stable. And I followed him and I said, I don't have the data in front of me because I didn't know he was going to say that, but he's wrong. And in fact, this is recent sales tax growth rates, and that very stable source to which they want to tie our tax system, entire tax system, on average in the last 20 years has grown by $26 million a year. That's almost a rounding error in the big picture. And so you don't really want a sales tax-based system because so much of what we consume right now is things that we don't tax. Utilities, food, prescription drugs, services. So, and the other things we've done in the last 20 years, we took the sales tax on food off, major mistake. We gave half of the motor vehicle sales tax to MoDOT. We're not taxing the internet efficiently. And then we did a change. I won't get into all the details of this, but things that are consumed in the manufacturing process, there were a couple of court decisions that basically said they loosened up how you interpret what's consumed in the manufacturing process. And we did a change, I believe it was in '99, to the tax law, and nobody knows what that is. The fiscal note was $70 million. Everybody I know thinks it's more than that, but nobody knows the real impact. So Now, the people who are advocating that we go to the fair tax are saying, well, we ought to do what Kansas did. And with all due respect to our neighbors to the west, the Kansas tax policy is the craziest damn thing I've ever seen. I mean, there's no other way to say it, and I'll show you why here. Some of these things are fine. You know, again, they increase the personal exemption, which reduces the amount you pay. They increase the head of household deduction, again, reduces the amount you pay. They had a three-tiered marginal tax system in Kansas, and they cut the top tier off. So they cut the 6.5% tier off and made 4.9% the top rate, and that's fine. That's something that in tax policy you can do. But then they eliminated the individual income tax for S corps, LLCs, and sole proprietorships. So again, let me give you an example, and I've got a slide here in a minute. I'm a LLC, my business is, and before that I was a sole proprietorship, have been for 20 years. So in Kansas, I would pay no income tax. Your employees of your school district who get a W-2 would pay income tax. And it's a weird thing that on the federal tax forms, all of that income is treated equally. Well, Kansas has suddenly decided that some income is better than others. And the argument again is, well, we're going to cut taxes and we're going to create jobs. So Kansas, before they did this change, House Bill 2117, they had revenues of $6.2 billion, and after revenues of $5.4 billion. And I think the after, that number is too high. Okay, I think their actual losses are going to be greater than that, and I will show you why. And again, this is a chart that just shows the foregone revenue, and by 2018, it's $933 million on a base of about $6.2 billion. So Kansas is going to have to decide how they balance their budget, and they've already had, you see a lot of articles where there's a lot of confusion over there. The other interesting thing in Kansas is Kansas was truly the three-party state, very conservative Republicans, moderate Republicans, and then a few Democrats. And after this change occurred in the elections of 2012, the conservative Republicans went after the moderate Republicans in the primaries, and they virtually wiped them out. So as you look at this issue, as Kansas tries to address it, it has an even more conservative legislature than adopted these policies, which I think is going to make them hard to change. So let's talk a little bit about LLCs, S corps, and sole proprietorships. And again, I can tell you about those things because my business has been that for going on 21 years. And the interesting thing is that they are really, those entities are kind of a legal entity. They're not really a tax filing entity. And in my income tax form, I fill out a Schedule C, which is my business, and then it falls to line 12 of my federal income tax form. If you have a W-2, you report that income on line 7 of your federal income tax form, and all that income is treated equally. And suddenly Kansas is saying, well, we're going to let these, these other types of entities, S corps, LLCs, and sole proprietorships, we're going to treat them differently. Well, I look at my own income tax form, and my wife, simply for retirement purposes, she receives a W-2, okay? It would take nothing more than me calling my accountant to switch that income to partnership distribution and not have it taxed if we're in Kansas. My son is one of our employees. I pay him with a W-2. I could just as easily, and literally I can tell you exactly what it costs you to create a different entity. You can go 2 minutes over here to the Secretary of State's office. When I created my business going on 21 years ago now, I went to the Secretary of State's office and I registered 2 fictitious names. I paid them $4, $2 a name. Currently, it costs you $7. There's a $5 technology fund that you pay on top of the $2. So for $7, you can walk over to the Secretary of State's office and create a sole proprietorship. In my instance, I could have Chris, my son, go over and create Christopher Moody and Associates and pay him as a sole proprietorship, and he would not pay any taxes. So the Kansas numbers have got to be wrong because of the ease of which you can switch tax-paying category. And it was probably going to be nirvana for CPAs, because they're going to find a way to tell people, okay, here's how you switch your tax status, and then you avoid individual income tax. So as I indicated, line 7, you'd be taxed. Line 12, you wouldn't be. And then C Corps would still be subject to the corporate income tax. Again, it's very easy to create these entities. By the way, if you want to do an LLC, I think that's $50. Anyway, and when Governor Brownback signed this, he said it's going to eliminate the individual income tax on 191,000 businesses. I think, again, the impact's going to be greater than that. And he said it's going to create 22,900 new jobs. Now, it's easy to kind of be critical of Kansas. Governor Brownback, and the danger I think that could exist in Missouri, in Kansas, he submitted a revenue neutral tax package. And guess what happened? All what he calls the pay-fars, they disappeared and the tax cuts stayed there. And now in December, Governor Brownback said the state is facing what he calls a hard dip because of the loss of the tax dollars, and that he thinks we got to do some pay-fars. Well, one of those is taking away the mortgage interest deduction from their taxes. How popular do you think that's going to be in this even more conservative General Assembly in Kansas that adopted these changes? And on top of that, their current budget in the $5.4 billion has a sales tax that's expiring that would make the hole even bigger if they don't reauthorize that, and that's probably not a slam dunk. So again, as I said, expiring sales tax, and oh, by the way, they just got a appellate court decision in Kansas saying that their school formula is not adequately funded. And that's, as I understand it, about a $350 to $400 million hit. So to conclude here, and then I'll answer any questions, I hear a lot, we got too much tax revenue, we need to cut taxes and create jobs. And I would ask you to look at that data and say, how does any of that data support that idea? But nobody looks at any of the data, they just say it. And I think Kansas is really going to feel a lot of pain in 2014, and I think Kansas is on a race to the bottom, and I don't think we should follow them. In sales taxes, again, looking at my own individual income tax return, if you were to eliminate my income tax in Missouri, I cannot possibly buy enough to replace the dollars, okay? If I go out and try and spend every dollar I've got of income and buy something subject to sales tax, I can't buy enough. And so if you think that sales tax, and look at that, about $24, $25 million a year on average growth in sales tax, that's the theory in Kansas. They're going to have to replace it with the sales tax. I don't think it works. And again, if tax reductions spur economic growth, where's the growth been? And again, I would go back to, with this term-limited legislature, reminding them if they cut taxes and they're wrong and they want to reimpose them, and many won't. Actually, in a hearing last week on the Tabor bill, I heard 3 senators in one committee, the term they used was, we need to starve the beast, okay? So on the one hand, they might argue, oh, we're going to create economic growth. If I could have you remember one thing, it's starve the beast. I was shocked simply because I've always thought that was part of what the philosophy is, but I'd never heard somebody articulate it in public. But one senator said, this is what we're going to do, and there were a couple more who said, yeah, let's starve the beast. Let's cut government. And that's what this is about. It's not about creating economic growth. It's starving the beast.